The goal with this video is to give you just a high level sense of how you can do typical functions that you're used to doing in Excel using SQL. The goal is not to have you do each of these because that'll be shown in later videos, but just to give a very high level view of some Excel functions and how those could be carried out in SQL. So let's begin here with a filter. So filter is used to limit the data that you're showing. And so for example, here I can filter on just cabbage, right, with Excel. I create this table, I use this filter, and I select one or more items and just filter on those. And so I can do much the same with Query Storm using the where clause. And so I'm going to click connect to workbook. And then I'm going to write select star from grocery purchases, where item in, and then I select my items, and here I'm doing cabbage and bread. So let's do cabbage and bread like that. Click run. And so now we get a data set which is just the bread and the cabbage rows, not any of the other rows like apples, asparagus, etc., but just those rows with bread and cabbage. So I can do that in Excel with a filter. In SQL, I use this where clause here. So this is everything, right? All the different items. If I use this select clause like this with a where, then I instead get only those where the item is cabbage or bread. So that is the filter or the where clause. Now let's take a look at sort. In Excel, I can sort using, if I go up here, go to data, and I can sort alphabetically, starting from B, C, and so on, right? Now let me release the filter. So now we see our sort, and we start with apples and go down alphabetically. So if I want to do the same here, I can use an order by and item. Click run. And now I also see that I start with apples and go down through to potatoes. So an order by clause does much the same as a sort does, right? And that's why in this chart, I have sort and also order by. Now, how about a pivot table? I can do a pivot table if I want to summarize my data. Go insert pivot table. And let's do gender and cost. So that's a very simple pivot table that just tells me how much the people with a gender of female spent and how much the people with the gender of male spent. So I can do the same here if I do sum cost. Let's do gender from grocery purchases, group by gender. And so now I get this table here with female and male pivoted in much the same way that I see up here. Right, so I've got this group by and an aggregate function. So if we go over to the Excel versus SQL tab, you'll see that the pivot table equivalent with SQL is aggregation. The next function on the list is VLOOKUP in Excel or left join with SQL. And so if I go over to the grocery purchases data again, I'm going to do a VLOOKUP on the item. I'm going to go over to this item type table and select that whole table and do a comma 2 and then false. And what this will do is this will look at the value in this cell and then go to this table and look at column A, find the first occurrence of that value, and then go over to the second column, which is why I have a 2, and pull in the value. So for example, here we look down through here, find apples, and then since 2 is the parameter, we look for fruit, right? So here we've got this 2, and so that means we're looking at the second column. If I put a 1, I would just get apples, right? Because it looks down through here, finds apples, and then looks in the first column, which says apples, and returns that. So if I put a 2, that goes instead of the first column to the second column and finds that value of fruit. So that's a VLOOKUP. Now, if I want to do the same, by the way, it's not only fruit, it also says vegetables for those, and then fruit for cherries and so on. So if I want to do the same with SQL, I would do something like this. Select star from grocery purchases. Then let's do left join to the table item type on grocery purchases dot item equals item type dot item. Click run. And now we have a table which has the item type in it and also the data from the grocery purchase data set, right? So that's very similar to a VLOOKUP because it's taking the, and then the last item here is removing duplicates. So in Excel, we can do this if we highlight, for example, a column like this, and we go to data, and now there's this nice remove duplicates function. And so we can just choose unselect all and just use, say, first name. And now we just have these unique values of the first name, Anthony, Janet, Johnny, Paul, Sandra, and Laura. Okay, so I'm going to undo that with Control Z. And now I'm going to do select distinct first name from grocery purchases. And so this distinct means that instead of getting just all of the rows with multiple versions of the same name, I'm going to get only the unique versions of the names. So Anthony, Janet, Paul, Johnny, Sandra, and Laura, they're each just listed once. And so that is doing much the same thing as this remove duplicates is doing. So the purpose here is not to get you worried about any of the details of the SQL syntax, the way that you structure these SQL statements, but just to give a general sense of how things that you're used to doing in Excel can also be done using SQL.